I think Yosemite does a great job of luring you in, and you get really, really close, but you just don't quite connect the final dot, and it kind of leaves you hanging. And I feel like I've just continually been left hanging over the years. I feel like Yosemite, it's my past, present, and future. It's my past because it's kind of where I grew up and cut my teeth. It's my present because it's where I want to be right now in my climbing. I feel like it gives me the most back in terms of like feedback about where I'm at right now as a climber. I see it as my future too because there's so much possibilities in this one valley. Day 1 million probably, the last 10 years. Yosemite for me feels like it's a lifetime investment into my personal climbing mastery. There's a learning process, and you may feel like you've learned 90% of it because you're that close to doing it, but maybe that last 10% is the most important thing that you can learn out of your whole climbing, and so why would you ignore that possible chance?
Come on, Carlo. Dig in. Yeah, come on.
Ow! Yosemite is about scale and magnitude. Big walls, 3,000 foot granite monoliths that over the years has made it the mecca of world rock climbing. Also the rock quality, glacier polished fine grained granite, diamond hard. If you talk to anybody that's from anywhere on earth that went to Yosemite, the story's pretty much the same, and that is, it's like being a granite astronaut up on some of that stuff. Just so sheer. Underneath the trees, especially in the last 25 years, there's been some very interesting bouldering that has happened in Yosemite that's technically on par with anything in the world, really.
I grew up in Santa Rosa, California, just north of San Francisco. Yosemite was definitely the first place that I really started to dig into outdoor climbing. I was barely been climbing a year, maybe 14 years old at the time, just trying to get into climbing. And I remember being stoked on it. And really, I loved crack climbing. I loved the bouldering. I loved all of it. As long as I was climbing on rocks, I just didn't care what we were doing. I mean, I was obsessed with Yosemite climbing from the first time that I was there. And I just started reading any and every book, watching any film I could about Yosemite climbing. It was literally all I did was just obsess over it. And so, there's certain iconic climbs that come up. Of course, Midnight Lightning, just an absolute mega classic. I would say Midnight Lightning seems like it might have been the first boulder problem that had that allure to it, that drew people in.
Come on, Carlo.
Come on, man.
Come on.
Yeah, move it. Come on.
Come on, Carlo.
And, seeing Midnight Lightning obviously is just an absolute mega classic with just a lot of history behind it. To have kind of that connection of this is the history and I can kind of feel what that's like was a really cool experience.
Midnight Lightning really started it all. There is a line beyond which if you go, it's going to be really hard for anybody. And Midnight Lightning was that line. John Yablonsky, who was a visionary climber back in the early 70s, had first spotted these holes, and nobody in their right mind would think about a boulder problem going up the underside of that boulder. There's a whole bunch of mythology about Yabo tripping on an acid and looking up and seeing, ghosts that are doing the thing. I would say that was the turning point to where individual problems became sort of targets for climbers.
And at that time, I'd never heard bouldering being its own sort of entity and sport. Was, it was amazing. For sure, Midnight Lightning was the first problem where people would go all the way to Yosemite to just try that problem. But it was so difficult, nobody could do it.
I think it's just a testament to what a cool experience bouldering is that you can just sit there and see the whole problem like appear all at once. And it's something that you may have missed for years. You could have stared at the same wall over and over and over again and not seen it. And then based off of your experiences as a climber elsewhere, all of a sudden you come back and you see that something that you thought was blank, and all of a sudden the features start to line up and you can start to envision this path to go from the bottom to the top. And I always thought that was a really cool story that just highlighted what the experience of bouldering is and why bouldering is so cool. Midnight Lightning's story is just a classic example of like having to really expand your vision for things to see something, and that ends up being the progression into a new realm of climbing. I think it was the year 2008. That's when I was like, oh, I should go try Thriller again because it's a super classic Camp 4 boulder. And I remember it being just like, okay, this feels like kind of the door to the upper end of Yosemite bouldering.
And every time a level of difficulty gets established, it opens up a whole other wonderland of things to do. Midnight Lightning opened up a new level of difficulty, and Thriller and all the other stuff that came afterwards represented a technical level that nobody was able to even imagine, except Moffett and Backer and Calca. But they're really the people that jumped up the technical level quite a bit, right?
In 91, I went back to Yosemite. I'd done Thriller, and then I noticed the boulder problem to the left of it, the Force. I spent probably 2 or 3 hours preparing the base. It was pre-bouldering mats.
I think it's really special that you've got the Force and Thriller just right there next to each other on the same wall, put up by some of the titans of Yosemite bouldering history.
It was great for me, super special to be a first Ascensionist in Camp 4. And I think before I'd done the Force and Stick It, and there hadn't been any new boulder problems in Camp 4 for about 10 years. I mean, nothing had been done. I think at the time, those boulder problems didn't really push bouldering in Yosemite because bouldering still wasn't super accepted as its own sport in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, I think because El Cap and Half Dome are insane, you know, there's nothing else like them. So it makes sense that it overshadows the bouldering, even though the bouldering is some of the best in the world.
Yeah, specifically the word that I've always actually used is that it's overshadowed quite literally by the wall climbing here. And I think that you can kind of feel dumb bouldering in the valley. Like I've felt dumb before. I'm like, it's pretty sick to look up and see these 3,000-foot walls. But at the same time, if the boulders are as world-class as the walls are, and you're like, I can't climb on as good of boulders, you know, anywhere else in the world, essentially, then it makes sense to climb on these boulders.
It was 1993, really in the forefront of my mind. I'd said to Kurt Albert, who was one of my best mates, I said, why don't we try and free the nose? So the idea of the whole trip was to go and try and free climb the nose, and we ended up doing a bit of bouldering. Then I tried the Dominator, and at that time I'd seen Dominator. There'd been chalk on Dominator for 10, 20 years, and I kind of got obsessed with the Dominator.
For many years, when bouldering was first becoming bouldering and not just practice climbing, Midnight Lightning was like the Yosemite boulder. For my generation growing up, it was always Dominator. You're like, you know, almost no one has done Dominated when I was first climbing. I think there was like a handful of ascents. And so it's like, and all of those people were like legends, like extremely good at climbing.
It's like a test. If you're gonna come to Yosemite and wanna be like, I'm a Yosemite boulder, I'm a good Yosemite boulder, you kinda gotta do the Dominator.
It's the dark side because it's always going to be in the shadow of the big stuff, right? Which is always going to be the thing that people understand. I know why somebody's going to want to look at how marvelously huge that is, right? It's dead obvious to look up and see. It's like walking on the moon or something. These other things, that short things that are super technically difficult, like Moffett on Dominator, you can only understand as a participant. The experience gives you the meaning, and you're doing something that hard at that time. You understand and you completely know this kind of movement is not something human beings have ever done. And you're pushed by unseen hands to try to get it done.
For me, I really like short problems. I really like a power move. a real stopper move. For me, the ultimate problem is really one move. If you can get 2 holes, pull on, try and get to another one, have body tension, feet in different areas. That for me is a boulder problem. Just one move.
The Dominator was really probably the first double-digit problem that I tried, and it was my first time really climbing in Yosemite. I had no business being on it, but I tried really, really hard to like pull off the ground and do the first move, and I tried a lot. And every time I would come to Yosemite, I would just try that move over and over and over again. And every time I could kind of get there, but not really get there. And it stayed that way for, nearly 20 years. I'd climb my V13 in, 2007. And then in 2008, I came back to Yosemite in the wintertime, tried Dominator, couldn't touch it. A couple years later, I repeated the game, which was at the time considered to be the hardest boulder problem in the world. A year after that, I came back to Yosemite, tried the Dominator again, couldn't touch it.
I think it was 93 when I did the Dominator. It was the hardest boulder problem I'd done at the time.
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, the Dominator was the hardest boulder problem in Yosemite, and I feel like it stayed that way for like 15 years or something. Like Jerry Moffat did it. People would walk by it and try it and feel the holds all the time, but we just all had this impression that Jerry was like on a different level. The way that Jerry did it is insanely hard. Like, I don't think people really ever do it that way still to this day.
I think it was, early 2000s, this heel hook method came about. I think I was always drawn to the Dominator with the original Beta because of how they talked about that experience of like understanding the move and how much that understanding helped their progression as, strong climbers. And I felt like I wanted to have that feeling too. And so I wanted to focus on, working on the Dominator in that original way. 2013, I came back and spent the whole winter in Yosemite, and I was like, I gotta do the Dominator. And I learned a lot from the boulder problem. Like, I don't think a boulder problem has ever taught me as much as the Dominator has taught me about how my body moves in space and how I apply pressure to different limbs at different times while executing a move. And also being able to understand how much pressure is being applied at certain times while executing a movement throughout. It wasn't reachy. It wasn't like, there wasn't anything about it that I could like make any excuses. But I didn't do it. I basically stuck the first move, which is the crux move, and I blew my pulley on it. It was just always there, lingering. It's like this first hard thing that I'd wanted to try and climb when I was 14 years old, and I'd been able to climb all these other harder boulder problems, and this thing, I just couldn't do the damn thing. 2013, I was looking for new climbs, and I really had started to kind of develop my vision for first ascents and started to see things that I'd never seen before. That year, I threw a rope down and started to scrub up the Dark Side project. It's pretty obvious because of this really good start rail that it starts on, and then you logically follow this rail up and it ends, but then there's this other kind of sloping ramp feature that begins and then slowly leads you into the end of the force. And it didn't look possible, really. It looked like this sloper ramp especially was basically impossible to hold on to, but maybe, just maybe, someday it could be usable. It seemed reasonable. Like, it seemed like it was very far away, but also something that was like, maybe these pieces can fit together. It seemed very far off.
I just remember doing the force, looking to the left and seeing this line and thinking, wow, that's the next one to do on this boulder. And thinking, that's going to be pretty impossible. It's going to be, super mega hard, but maybe one day. But even then you don't think, it's hard to really conceive that anybody would have climbed it because it just looks so hard.
So returning to Yosemite in 2013, I like to repeat the classics before I really start digging in on new first ascents, because I think it's important to understand where the level's at. I was still drawing on a lot of inspiration that I got from, the Dosage series that had come out quite a few years prior, and stoked to dig in and try and do those things. Boulders like Park Life and Yaba Roof were, kind of cutting edge for the time when the Dosage film came out. And that Dosage for me was, it really shifted my perspective of like how I viewed Yosemite Valley and how I viewed Yosemite Valley bouldering.
Dosage Volume 5.
In my mind, Yosemite bouldering has always been under the radar. Like, there's not many people doing it. And when I wasn't on the big walls, I was using the bouldering for training. There was yet another season where I came kind of intending to climb walls and just bailed completely so I could climb boulders. But it really was probably more about the movement intelligence, like the sort of analytic mentality is what I learned.
The climbing in Yosemite, it demands perfection a lot of times. Yosemite is by far the most technical bouldering area that I've ever climbed at. Strength obviously matters in terms of climbing really hard boulders, but if you don't have the technique to go along with it, then these lines are going to feel virtually impossible. That's for sure.
You come to Yosemite, or the average person who climbs here consistently, we're less tied to numbers and more tied to what we're learning while we're on the rock. And that's the main allure of Yosemite. Randy is one of the largest contributors to bouldering in Yosemite. He's put up endless first ascents, it seems. He's gone all around the valley, and he also is just this magician on rock.
There's been, so many people throughout the years in Yosemite bouldering that have kind of helped push the limits forward. A lot of the time it was like this bay crew that was coming up from the bay, and that was, Randy included. They just did a good job of scrubbing a lot of new stuff and always kind of exploring new zones and new boulders and just like a good community hype around it. Randy in particular was super inspiring to me because he's kind of just a magician of the Valley granite, and that's something that I've always aspired to be.
Randy is an absolute wizard. I feel like I've learned more climbing with that guy than I've learned from many people.
I think one of the cool things about Randy is that I feel like while a lot of bouldering development has looked down, they're like, we're gonna go lower and it's gonna be harder. Randy's looking up, he's like, we're going bigger.
And it was cool because Randy's really, willing to share a lot of the newer stuff that he was working on. And it was stuff that he had added in the years after the Dosage film, and was just some really unique vision that he had for different boulders in Yosemite. While I was working on Dominator, he introduced me to kind of other lines that he had put up. This project near King Air that he had done called The Shield. And for me, I wanted to get better at Yosemite Valley bouldering, and that meant trying to do kind of everything, either of the more older boulders like Dominator, or more of the newer age stuff that was a little bit more tech and power and had a little bit more of that new school vibe to it. Lines like Stick It Static, which is just like a lower static start to Stick It. I think the more you dig into Yosemite bouldering, the more you realize how much of it relies on this power tech style. And I think very quickly I realized that that's where I wanted, my future as a climber to go. I wanted to be a better power tech climber.
I'd say Yosemite, pretty classic power technique. There's a lot of subtlety and a lot of movement throughout your body that isn't just related to how strong you are. It's more like dancing on rock as opposed to bearing down.
It's interesting, that technical style of climbing that Yosemite is, I felt like was lost for a lot of years. People didn't like that style for a long time, partly just because it's humbling. For most people, you gotta put in time to get good at climbing there.
Carlo doing Cold Snap and Randy doing Junebug were definitely the two hardest things in the valley. And I would say that the first V14s in the valley. I tried for 2 or 3 seasons, and I remember being like, I will climb V15 before I climb this, and Carlo originally called it V12. And I was like, this is the most sandbag thing ever. And I climbed V15 before it. I wasn't wrong, it's heinous.
And really Cold Snap for me was just the eye opener for my ability to envision something, Valley in particular, and then bring it to fruition. I always felt like I couldn't really give V13 to anything in the valley until I had done the Dominator, because that was the standard for V13. Obviously, in retrospect, like, the grade might be different on that one, and it seems like I might have been kind of off on that, which I've been off on like a lot of the valley stuff.
Yosemite is so great because everything's supersized, right? Like the boulders are big, El Cap is huge.
One of the sickest things about Yosemite is a lot of the boulders are really big and like the high ball potential is really cool, and that's like one of the things I've always been most psyched on. But a lot of the harder boulders here are quite scary. It was cool because like Zephyr, Carlo, and Randy and I all tried together initially, and then there was like this crazy windstorm that knocked down these trees, enabled us to build this landing to make it a little safer, and that was why I called it Zephyr.
And so we all sessioned at night on it, where we slowly sorted out the bottom moves. I was kind of like, oh, sick, this thing goes. I'll come back next year and dig into it. And so the next season I came back, and it was a pretty rugged day out there. It was just Mary, and we had a limited selection of pads, and it's definitely one of the more serious high balls I've ever done. Usually, you know, when you do a section on a rope, you're like, oh, it feels a little sketchy, but then when you don't have a rope on, you're like a little bit more wired in and dialed in on it. And this boulder was kind of the opposite for me. Like, I got up there, and even though I executed it perfectly, like, it felt extremely sketchy, like, without a rope. And falling was kind of not an option, especially with the limited amount of pads we had. I'd say Zephyr's for V12 is one of the scarier, harder lines I've ever climbed, like 100%.
A lot of modern bouldering is like a wall that's got a bunch of holds and you got all these little variations. Most of Yosemite bouldering is like pure. There's a boulder problem with just the holds that you need going up some striking face that's quite high, and it's so aesthetic.
Keenan started stepping it up, adding some additional stuff like Zephyr and Delta V, and the Wing Tiger was another one of the kind of more new school problems.
Around 2013-ish, we're seeing Keenan mutate. He's a California local. Later in the teens, we're seeing Carlo opens a gym here, Jimmy moves here, and here being California.
Everything you do in Yosemite is about becoming a master of Yosemite. It doesn't matter if it's the boulders or the walls. In 2017, I moved back to California from Colorado, and during that window, I was doing a little bit more trad climbing than I was bouldering. I was kind of mixing it up with trying a lot more on Meltdown and other trad lines. It was a style that I knew that I was lacking in. Being able to really trust these horrible, horrible feet was not easy for me. If I can figure out how to get comfortable on Meltdown, then I would have reached a point of mastery that now I can take to other things in the valley. I realize how much my technical ability as a climber has like changed over those years, from learning how to be comfortable on the feet of Meltdown. I had to really go full circle to perfect my ability to climb on every level before I could come back to the Dominator. It wasn't until finally in 2020 that I came back and there was just this last little thing that I was able to learn. And I think that the Dominator does a very good job of isolating your weaknesses. And if it doesn't fit you very well, then it really, really isolates that. And so I think for me, there was something about the moves of the Dominator that just didn't quite fit my strengths, especially throughout those years. And I think that that's the fun part of bouldering, is that, and that's why you really have to take the grades out of it, is that you have to, if you want to master climbing, you can't just focus on like getting to a certain grade level. You have to find these problems, these challenges that just sneakily kind of poke you in your weak spots and then dig in, because that's where that mastery is going to come from in the long run.
The bouldering here takes away all of your ties to a sense of, I want to climb this grade. What you want to do when you're here is, I want to learn that move. I want to be able to do that climb, and you enjoy the process of learning on it. You don't come here to climb numbers, and that's what I love. You'll try something and try something and try something for years, and then you'll finally do it, and it'll feel 4 grades easier than you think that it was. And you've just gone through this massive learning process to where now you understand the rock a little bit better, you understand the movements, the subtleties in it. And I think it's really intellectually stimulating here, I would say.
There are all these logistical issues, but when it comes to the climbing itself, like, it's so unique. And, you know, for me, having been climbing for, you know, just over 20 years now, like, that feeling of progression is really kind of rare to come by, you know, like getting stronger or getting better or whatever. And when I first went to Yosemite, it was so motivating because I was like, wow, every time I went out climbing, I felt like I was getting better. And Yosemite really humbles you in that regard and kind of makes you feel like you're kind of starting over. There's this thing called Tyranny that Carlo and I established down near El Portal that is one of the more rad things, I think, that have been climbed in the last 4 or 5 years.
Tyranny was a project that I had for a really long time that eventually Jimmy and I started trying together, and then we both were able to send it kind of back to back. And then, yeah, the level just started to kind of go up from there, really.
Very atypical of like your classic Yosemite style where, you know, maybe there's no holds or maybe it's really technical. It's honestly a little bit of a breath of fresh air from like trying all the hard, fickle projects that are in the valley proper. Finally, we were like, cool, we can actually try this thing a bunch, and the conditions aren't as important, and there's actually holds.
Everyone kind of wondered when the first V14 was going to happen in Yosemite, and it's a little still like, who knows when that actually happened, because there are some V12s that actually might be V14. So we felt like it was at a level that was for sure like V14, and that we felt really comfortable calling it that.
Having Jimmy and Carlo, who are like by far 2 of the strongest and most prolific developers in the US, here obviously makes a huge difference and has made a huge difference. There's not a ton of other people that regularly would come to the valley to try and do new stuff. Whether or not you talk about this, the seal got broken on V12 when Jimmy and Carlo did Tyranny, when they gave it V14, and then it was like, we can have harder than V12. I was always like, we have a lot of things harder than V12.
The last 4 years, I feel like we've done a lot of really amazing new stuff, you know, from everything like up in the valley and some rad projects kind of near Camp 4 all the way down, you know, towards El Portal, like in the riverbed down there. There has been like a huge slew of new hard boulders that have been climbed. And
we were here in Camp 4. This is a boulder that Jimmy did quite a few years back. Years ago, like, looked at this whole line, which is like started from down here, because there's this really nice set of rails that come in from, you know, a sit start.
So it's just typical valley style.
Tech power, unique body positioning, like a lot of feel climbing where you're just having to kind of feel it out and be relaxed even though you're in a constant state of like tension.
There's not necessarily like the volume of hard boulders that you have in like Rocklands or something, and there's not the obvious style of everyone liking. Like in Rocklands, you're like, oh, I'm gonna jump to this edge and it's gonna feel badass. And in the valley, you're like, I'm gonna do this crazy hip swivel and it's gonna feel weird and I'm gonna suddenly do the move. And you're gonna be like, it doesn't necessarily feel badass all the time, but it's really satisfying in a way that's different.
Let's go, Carlo.
Nice. Come on. Yes.
Come on, dude. And just like that, Valley Classic is born. Woo! Good. Fuck yeah, dude.
That's sick. There has been more hard bouldering happening in Yosemite in recent years, but I think overall it's still a pretty small group, which is one of the things I love about it.
Tyranny, Level Terrace Apart, so I'd say those two are kind of took it to the next level. I mean, Level Terrace Apart is the thing that immediately comes to mind. It's the first 15 in the park.
So Pablo established the only V15 in the valley at the moment, called Level Terrace Apart. It's funny that it's the only V15 in the valley. It seems like there should be way more, but it's kind of a notorious grade to find. I tried it a bit that season with him and Carlo and Keenan, you know, kind of the whole crew kind of put some effort into it. The rock is really, really good, and the movement is really cool and interesting as well. So that was a great addition.
Yeah, good. Take your time. Good, dude. Nice and slow.
They're some of the best boulders in the world and they travel all over the world, and a lot of them still say Yosemite is the best. And so I think if that got widely known, it could become more popular. Yeah, maybe it's a combination of the style and the lifestyle. Like the lifestyle in Yosemite is just not all that conducive to wanting to stay there for a long time and be a boulderer. And so you don't get the crowds of people like you do in Ticino.
No matter how good you are at climbing, anyone that comes here and is trying to do something new that's actually really hard or like cutting edge for the valley is going to take a long time.
I found this area on the lower 140 in the riverbed. I had spotted a lot of big, proud, cool lines that had a lot of holds on them, and instead of finding these blank faces like you find in the rest of the valley, they were just grips on things, and they looked very doable but hard. And then it wasn't until 2022 that I started to climb things like Bel Cerizo and Soriceto, which probably two of the better boulders I've ever climbed. They kind of feel like lines that are straight out of Ticino, where the rock is just absolutely primo. There was an obvious start hold, but the section between it was pretty blank and really hard to figure out what was going to be possible there. And so I just started chalking up non-holds to just see what I could use and what I could hang on. And it was in that process that I slowly discovered a sequence that worked. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can kind of hang it for a little bit.
Yosemite style, like the old school almost ethic, is that it's a really difficult place to climb, and the grades kind of reflect that. And Carlo growing up there, I think, was like, damn, this place is really hard, and he's proud of like that. proud of how hard the climbing is and how technical it is and how difficult it is to climb grades that you normally feel like you should climb relatively fast. So I think he just wants to keep that, keep that kind of vibe going on in terms of the new climbing that we're doing today. He kind of wants to maintain that.
That just turns people off, like that's one of the reasons I think it's not popular. Like if the problems were graded similarly to where they were in other places and you could come and put a lot of tick marks in your guidebook, there'd probably be way more climbers there, but it just takes a lot of work to send hard things there.
The Rookery, it's incredible. It's full package. Just the holds are amazing, the line's amazing. It's super tall, it's committing. It's got a dyno in the middle of it. I think for me, the Rookery ranks top 5 best boulders I've ever done. In the Valley, your sends just don't come very often. I pretty much had not sent much of anything that whole season, even after spending like quite a bit of time there. And it definitely set me up to feeling like a little bit of pressure off my back for like lifetime projects. I don't remember when I heard the Dark Side Project name. I just kind of have always known it as that. It made sense. You'd have to kind of go to a dark place in your bouldering progression in order to envision and dig into something as nasty as the Dark Side Project. And then when I moved back to California in 2017, that's where I was like, now that I'm here, now that I'm living here, let's start digging into these really futuristic projects that are gonna take multiple seasons to figure out. I knew it was doable, but there was a couple moves that felt like I could barely do them, and I was having a hard time envisioning like the full line kind of coming together. And then 2020 season was when Jimmy started trying it a lot, and that's also the season where I started to have some pretty good goes, but also kind of started dealing with my first split tips on it.
It was a cool project for me because I was like, wow, an old school boulder in a new school difficulty. So kind of like that technical traverse, crimping, slopers, all that kind of stuff that you get out of a lot of like the Yosemite bouldering, but yet it's like a next level thing. So I was really motivated by that, being like, damn, this thing's like barely there, can't tell if it goes. I put in probably 12 days on it and got super close, pretty close to going into the force, like the last couple moves until it's like, and then after that I was like, oh man, I'm gonna do this thing for sure. Gave another 6 sessions and like never got back up there. And it was the most frustrating thing. Probably the most condition dependent boulder that I've ever tried in my life. Like the holds are terrible, and if it's too humid, can't stick to it. If it's just barely too dry, can't stick to it. It's been 4 years now and I haven't gone back to try again.
The Dark Side is the most condition dependent boulder problem I've ever tried personally. And that's because you've got an extremely difficult crimp section down low, which is probably the crux. And then you've got a hyper condition dependent sloper that you have to be able to feel really, really good on. And then it culminates with another crimp section at the end, which is not the physically most difficult part of the problem, but you do need to have like really good skin for it and feel sticky on those crimps in order to succeed.
Damn it.
The whole time you're just checking in on different sections of the boulder throughout the session to see where your skin's at. And you're just like, okay, the sloper section feels like Velcro now, but now the crimp section feels like a little like mushy on it and it doesn't feel great. And then you're like, okay, when do I try? When am I gonna split a tip? When am I gonna feel good on this bit, you know? And there was minute to minute where I'm like, sloper section feels like jugs. And then other times where I'm like, I can barely pull off the ladder on this sloper bit to feel good.
The dark side's intriguing because there's a part that looks easy because it's low angle, and there's a part that looks impossible because the holds look bad. There's only like a couple moves that are actually pretty hard physically, and the rest of it is really like these little tic-tacky moves, and when you do them in ISO, they are not hard. You'll do them every try, feels chill, it's like unconcerning. And then when you try to link more than a handful, it becomes like a nightmare all of a sudden. It's the lowest angle hard boulder in the world, I think, and then probably because of that nature, I would guess the most technical. I think it is really fitting because it is the epitome of a technical boulder and what a technical boulder kind of feels like it even could be. Like, it's hard for me to actually conceptualize something being more technical. And so I think it is kind of the perfect new school challenge in the Valley.
I felt like the dark side for me represented a culmination of everything that I've learned here. Being patient with your projects, understanding the granite and the crystals and how your fingers line up on everything, how to apply pressure at different times, how to conserve energy, how to float throughout, really difficult sections of rock climbing, and how to just be a really proficient Yosemite climber, almost a perfectionist of Yosemite granite.
Yes. Come on, Carla. Dig in. Yeah, come on.
Ow! Ow!
Come on.
I think that I needed that head fuck of an experience of this type of boulder in order to feel like I could kind of put like a cap on this decade of learning, that I'd had in Yosemite bouldering.
Come on.
It's my most important addition to the bouldering world. I'm most proud of it because of how much patience I took with it over the years, how many times I wanted to give up, and I also let go of it for a really long time and then came back to it. I've had a really healthy projecting relationship with it, and I think I like to use it as an example for how I envision what I want bouldering to look like for me in the future too. And I want to keep trying things that are that hard for me. And I want to keep envisioning things for myself that are far beyond where I'm at, and then really being diligent about sticking with them over the years and not letting myself like lose the psyche even when they feel impossible. I'm at my worst. And I've been just really happy and proud of like the process of how I took it on.
fucking believe that just happened. Holy shit. Nice, dude. What the fuck? Oh man.
Get back on there.